back, everybody. If we can ask you to take your seats, we're going to kick off with our last portion of today's event. And again, for our next speakers, we've got a duo, a dynamic duo, to be sure. My pleasure to welcome first Mike Bloxham, SVP of National TV and Video for Magid Associates. So Mike has worked in TV research for over 25 years, although I'm not sure he'll confess to it that long. He gets to pull it off because he was born in the UK and the accent will get just about anything, right, Mike? Yep. Right. Good service in restaurants. He really is a thought leader, an innovator, and he has extensive experience across media and media channels. And one of the media channels he's worked in, as noted in his bio, is National TV and Video. And one of his key partners is Howard Turner, who is the Chief Research Officer for Turner Broadcasting. Howard is also a member of the ARF Board of Directors. He has a lengthy career in media. He spent time with AOL. He was with Nielsen. He joined the Turner team in 2013? 12? I knew I was close. Damn. But the great thing about Howard is his support of lifting up the next generation. Turner is one of our premier sponsors of our ARF Leadership Labs that Gail referenced earlier this morning. So we're really thankful for all of Howard's support. And they're here today to talk about correlations and causalities, some new research that they've developed on the relationship between show fandom and ad receptivity. So please help me in welcoming Mike and Howard to the stage.
Thank you. Okay, so the good news is, I think what you're going to hear from Mike and I is it's a natural extension of what you heard earlier from Professors Poltrak and Professors Morgan. You know, I've had the pleasure of being around this industry for a long, long time. It means I am, yes, old. But one of the cool things, and I think you've seen it through the day, and especially in Dave Poltrak and in Dave Morgan's presentation, is, you know, I think the TV industry sort of was in a place where we sat on our laurels, and we were like, okay, we're going to keep growing ratings. You know, advertisers are going to keep, you know, increasing CPMs because it's a world of limited supply. And I think we went through a couple of years where, maybe more than a few, where we forgot to innovate. And we forgot to think about the advertiser, and we forgot to think about value. And you know, the good news is because of great data sets and things like the introduction of data scientists to our arsenals, in the last couple of years, I think we've sort of maybe made 15 years of progress in about 2 or 3 years. And I think, especially now, one of the things, as you go into the upfront over the next 8 weeks, you're going to hear a lot of announcements around data strategies and data products, and you know, we'll be, you know, in our upfront we'll be yelling loudly about it. One of the things I think you want to just keep in the back of your head is, even though some of it is we're trying to nudge each other out, who's got the best solution, you know, I think our analytics are better than Dave's. But, you know, it's all under the guise of, if we do this right, TV, you know, we've left ROI for TV on the cutting room floor. Because we've transacted based on old metrics and we haven't thought about outcomes as much, we haven't delivered on the promise of TV to the extent we can. And even though we're all sort of yelling for share of voice, I think the end result of there's more ROI that advertisers can get out of TV with using the right data, using the right analytics. That's sort of the, you know, the vision. So I'm going to you can blame Mike for this graphic, but you know, if you think about it, in the world that was, well, actually, let me step back. So audience participation. Who was president of the United States in the year that the TV market started trading off of age, sex demographics? Not bad, actually. Lyndon Johnson. So in the mid-'60s, Nielsen realized measuring households was not enough. They need to measure demos. It was actually driven by ABC because they had this show, American Bandstand, and they needed to prove value to it. But from the mid-'60s to now, we're in the Neanderthal stage, right? Where, it's age, sex, especially in these days where markets are hyper-fragmented. You heard what Dave talked about earlier in terms of average ratings and how fragmented the linear TV space is. What I'm going to talk about is this idea of moving from demos to audience targets. So we're starting to get to, fully erect walking human beings. And one of the things that I think is really important is, we're a big believer that audience alone, reaching a marketing target alone is not enough, and that context or engagement or fandom or something that speaks to some other value besides someone sitting at a screen watching is important. One of the things that actually happened while we were here today is we made an announcement at Turner that we've extended our relationship with the NCAA men's basketball tournament through the year 2032. One of the reasons we made that announcement is we're highly, we believe strongly that, if you had your ad in the pod right before or right after that fabulous last 30 seconds of the championship, that was worth more than an exposure somewhere else. And, one of the things I think we haven't necessarily done as an industry is really solve the problem around context or engagement or some other value on top of it's someone in the audience target sitting and watching. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about our audience targeting products, and then Mike's going to talk a little bit about the journey we're going to do together to try to get to something that relates engagement or fandom or passion to what's being watched. So we've had 2 audience targeting products in market. This will now be the 3rd upfront that we're bringing these to our advertiser partners. Targeting Now is a product that we've rolled out for TBS and TNT. These are 2 obviously big, broad cable networks, lots of different programs, and we tend to sell advertising on these networks using broad rotators, right? We don't have that much original programming, so we're basically saying you're going to buy a campaign. It's going to have 20 spots in Comedy Block 1, which is a mix of Friends and Seinfeld and something else. And what we do is just basically rotate your spots. What Targeting Now does is say, let's take an audience view on that. Let's apply your marketing target if it's General Mills, cereal category users, and let's go in and pick spots specifically based on their ability to deliver lots of the people you care about. And the reason we part of Targeting Now is it's a little bit of a baby step, because what it does is it allows you to keep your mix the same, your historical CPM tracking doesn't get affected. We're just basically saying keep all of the deal parameters the same, let's just optimize within those parameters. Audience Now, I think, is very similar to the way that Dave's company goes to market, which is basically to say, day parts don't matter, historical mix doesn't matter. Let's just basically find the spots across the Turner portfolio that do the best job of reaching your audience target, and we're going to optimize the campaign using that inventory. And at the end of the day, all we care about is where does the target cost per thousand land. We don't care about what that was last year, because it's going to be different. So these are the 2 products that we've brought to market, highly successful. We're obviously blessed by great data that helps fuel this. We've gone the route of using some of the syndicated data sets that are available from Nielsen or ComScore, Rentrack, or TRA. Now, one key thing about the world we live in is, TV is a futures game, right? We are developing estimates of audience into the future. Right now, my team in Atlanta is building upfront estimates where we're actually projecting out audience delivery through the 4th quarter of 2017. as we thought about bringing this product to market, we realized that the best way to do it is use that same framework, and let's build a methodology that allows us to forecast out audience delivery into the future, audience delivery against the client's marketing target. So we built the system, we called it CAE, Competitive Audience Estimation. One great thing is the guy who's responsible for this, Wes Char, who's our chief data scientist, actually won a Great Minds Award at Rethink. But basically what it does is basically say, today at 4 o'clock, how many heavy serial buying households are watching Friends on TBS? And we use those forecasts to pick the right spots to optimize on your guys' behalf. This is, and you know, a lot of numbers here, but this is basically for a bunch of the targets we've run, the comparison of the MAPE, the standard error, for the demo target versus the audience target. And the key thing is, they're not that different. I mean, obviously, the audience target is going to be a little bit bigger because you tend to be dealing with smaller sample size than women 18 to 49, but generally, they're in around the same ballpark. So we feel good that we have the ability to forecast in an accurate way to fuel these products. Another way to look at it is to say, imagine you have 100 spots that you could potentially rotate people through, and you rank those 100 spots based on how well do they reach the target. How often are you picking the spots that fall in the top 2 quintiles, you know, the 50% best spots? So if you look at quintile 1 and 2, you can see most of the time we're talking about 70, 80% accuracy, that when we rank the spots, we're picking the right ones in terms of relative audience size. Now, what does this mean to advertisers? This is looking at the lift you're getting in terms of audience delivery of your audience target relative to an average schedule. You know, what we've basically done is we've run a lot of different schedules, and we're taking the mean and comparing the actual schedule we ran on behalf of an advertiser to that. So in the case of Target, the first advertiser, they got 62% more audience, the people they care about, than they would have gotten in an average rotation basis. So the reality is that even with making small changes to the allocation of spots within selling rotation, you still get huge gains. You know, the lowest 4%, but 4% with no additional cost. So we feel really good that this idea of moving from age, sex demographics to audience provides more value for TV brand advertisers. You know, the thought is to follow the circle that Dave showed you. The more impressions you have against your target, the higher ROI you're going to have. But again, think about the NCAA example I used before. Just audience is not alone. We really do believe, you know, it's NCAA, it's original shows on TBS or TNT. Hopefully everybody in this room is a fan of Samantha Bee on TBS. Who watches it? Come on, some of you. It's a great show. I don't watch a lot of our stuff, but it is a really great show. But, you know, audience alone is not enough. As an industry, we got to find a way to measure context or engagement, something else that maybe serves as a tiebreaker. So with that, we started conversations with Mike and Magid. They've done a lot of really good work in this space, and I'll let him take you through the math of what we've done together.
So this chart, am I on? I am. Okay. Audience targeting in the middle is a semi-formed human. That's not a pejorative statement at all. Audience targeting is obviously a massive leap forward from where we were in the none too distant past, and indeed to some extent where we still are. The point is, as Howard was saying, there's more to it. It's audience targeting plus. In this context, we're talking about, for shorthand, fandom or engagement. I tend to try to avoid using that word because some time ago when everybody was talking about engagement, what it actually meant became very diffuse. Undermined, perhaps. But it's how passionate people are about the shows that they watch. And think about it. If you're watching a program, it's because it makes you feel something. You don't tune into a program because you are a woman, 25, 44, with 2 kids in a household with a combined income in excess of $100,000. It might be that several people of that profile watch that show, but that's not why they watch it. So we want to understand what that contextual difference delivers, if indeed anything. And that's really what this is all about. Press green button. Yes, it went the right way. So fans are fantastic in any walk of life. Whatever you do, whatever it is, everybody likes the concept of fans. But the key question here is, do they actually make a blind bit of difference to an advertiser when your ad is consumed in the context of a show where a lot of people are very passionate about that show, where there's a lot of fandom? That's what we wanted to find out. Now, a little bit of backstory, but also something that kind of expounds upon this issue about the relationship with shows. We at Magid have this thing that we call emotional DNA. You will recognize this sort of chart from all sorts of aspects of your past life, from sort of middle school through university and wherever. It's actually called something called a dendrogram. And also, no presentation is complete without at least one furry animal. So I went the whole hog. You will find at least one of those cute, I predict, all the way from the dogs and the wolves to the Arctic foxes and all the rest of it. But this obviously, as you will recognize, is how biologists work out how closely related different animals within a particular species are or are not. And they do it by looking at the DNA. They look at the chromosomes. Basically, what we do is we take prime time programming and we do exactly the same. And we say which shows are more or less alike with others in the eyes of the people that view those shows. And, most particularly, how are they alike? Or how are they not alike? And we do the same with TV networks as well. And we do the same with shows that air on networks, so we can see which shows are like the networks they're on and which ones are not, and so on. And basically, we do that by asking viewers of those shows to describe them using a bunch of different terms. Here's an example. Major Crimes, because I'm with my friend from Turner, we might as well use one of their shows. We'll say, look, from which of the following words would you use to describe this show? They can use 1, they can use 2, they can use 12, they can use whatever they want. And we conduct a factor analysis, and that enables us to plot that show, along with all the rest of them, as something usually, depending on the wave of data, there'll be between 950 and 1,000 different primetime shows in each wave, because we generally survey about 20,000 people per wave. It enables us to plot that show on each of 8 different dimensions of emotional tonality that apply to shows, to networks, and to genres. One of the first findings, actually, when we originally did this, was that there are 8 statistically differentiated dimensions of tonality when you start to look across the board like this. Now, what does that tell you? Here's taking this further through. This is what we have labeled the dimensions as being. These are the names. And this shows you where, across 2 different waves of data, Major Crime sits. This is a pretty solid show. It doesn't move very much from wave on wave. In fact, you can see on the line up in the middle there, adrenaline, which actually often correlates rather well with ratings performance, is barely moved at all, which is good, I would suggest. Of course, it does depend what you're trying to do with your show, if you're trying to move it in a given direction. I should say there is no one good place. It depends what your show is, what your network is, what your audience is, and so forth. But it's an illustration of how you can think about the emotional tonality of a show. And from an advertiser's point of view, you say, what kind of emotional environment is consistent with the way my brand is perceived, or that I want it to be perceived, or my campaign to be perceived? What kind of message is what kind of environment is contextually beneficial? Now, that's a nice theory. There's been plenty of work done on priming and on context and so forth, which suggests that's going to be beneficial to my advertising. One of the things we ask, and I do very long, boring presentations about emotional DNA all the time. I'm cutting this right down to just get to the key nub. One of the questions we ask of people, we give them a long list of shows. We say, which of the following shows have you seen in the last 6 months? Every single one of those that they indicate they've seen, we ask one very simple question. We say, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is poor, 5 is excellent, how would you rate this show? So we get this very quick viewer evaluation, very simple. We ask a range of other questions as they get deeper into the instrument for 10 specific shows that they answer questions on. But that's what we get. And you see the score for Major Crimes there. That's actually very good. Inevitably, they're up in the 96th percentile. That's actually a pretty good score. Now, I want to jump back before I talk about this one. A&E is another network that uses this data. They use it in ad sales, use it in programming, and so on. The client there said, we need to do this piece of thought leadership research. And what we would really like to do, looking at this, is to understand the extent to which matching the emotional tonality of an ad with the show that it's in makes any difference at all to any measure of ad receptivity. And this project actually put me in a happy place because they didn't really care what the finding was, because they were just going to the market to inform the discussion. They said, if we find that there's no effect, great, as long as that conclusion is arrived at in a robust and defensible fashion, which makes a lot of my colleagues happy too, because we can play. What we found, cutting it very short, was that when you had a higher match, there was a lift over and above what you could achieve against those measures of ad receptivity than when you had a lower match. Because basically we took 100 different ads that were live on air at the time, matched and mismatched them, having tested them for their emotional DNA in one experiment. We matched and mismatched them and put them in content and had people view the content, ad breaks, content, ad breaks, and so forth. And then we did the ad receptivity tests. So we did actually see that there was a slight difference. It's a good difference, frankly, because you can achieve that if you're able to manage it without having to spend any more money. Though it should be said, nobody's going to start going out and producing ads on the basis of which shows they will match and mismatch with. Now, the other thing we found, and this wasn't part of our agenda with this particular piece of research, because we have all this data on how much people like or have an affinity with a show, we decided we would take the opportunity to look through that lens, say, does that make a difference? And we were kind of surprised by what we found. And you see on the left of the screen are the very standard metrics for ad receptivity. We obviously weren't going to reinvent that wheel. But the shorthand was that we found the difference between a show that was rated by a viewer as a 4 versus a 5 was in excess of 2x on every single one of those ad receptivity metrics. And we ran this data a few times to make sure of that. And you could have a hypothesis that the more I like a show, the less I actually want to see the ad and be interrupted. And I spoke to people like Dave Poltrak about this when we first came out with the data, and Horst Stipp at the ARF, and they said, yeah, directionally, we've seen other stuff over the years using very different methods which had gone that way. What we were doing was doing it at scale. So we were gratified by that. But then we thought, wouldn't it be interesting, and these are correlations, obviously, and that's fine, they were good correlations, and the media industry lives and dies on correlations for the most part. But we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could establish whether or not there's any degree of causality around this? If we could actually say that the more I like a show, the more receptive I am likely to be to an ad that I see during that show. Is that the question? And for that actually to be a driver of my response. So one of the things I like about working at Magid is they actually spend their own money on their own research to get smarter, which was nice. So I didn't have to go out and find a client to pay for this, which was really good. Although one day over lunch, Howard said, well, how do we get to be part of that? And I just off the cuff said, well, you could sponsor us, because I obviously wanted to own this data. And much to my surprise, he said yes. So I picked up the bill for lunch, and he paid me a rather larger amount of money to sponsor this. I consider that a good deal. So anyway, so we got up close and personal and worked on this, and then they worked on the design with us and everything. What we actually did, we defined these shows, we broke them out as to what is low, medium, and high in terms of a sense of affinity in this audience engagement. And much like the earlier experiment we'd done with A&E, we matched and mismatched these programs. Oh, sorry, we weren't doing the emotional tonality. We basically put shows in a sequence where you'd see content, ad break, etc. And then we ran the ad receptivity tests based on these shows to which people were randomly assigned in viewing. What we found, in short, was that in the medium and high conditions, in terms of how much people like a show, a randomly selected viewer is 5% more likely to respond better to the ad in that show than they are in other shows. And this is actually a causal factor. I said to our analyst, Aaron Hoffman, who is a cognitive science dude, and he's hardcore on these things, he won't ever let me say this is a driver of or this drives that. Quite simply because to him, that has a very specific meaning. Me, I'll use any word that comes to mind until he slaps me around the back of the head. So I said, okay, after he debriefed me on this, I said, can I say that the more I like a show, or sorry, the extent to which I like a show drives the extent to which I will be receptive to that ad. And he said, yes, you can say that. So good. I have the blessing of the wonk, which is significant. So, in effect, we came out finding that area, particularly with regard to first-run programming the individual has not seen before, this causal effect is present, which we're very pleased with, because I'm not sure it's actually been pulled out in that way before. We've seen lots of correlations, lots of directional stuff. I don't think we've established causality before. I may be wrong. The ARF would know this, and I look to them to expand upon this. And I've just noticed Gail's shoes. Wow! I often get shoe envy. Those are the kind of shoes that make me want to be a woman. All right. So, to finish off, what are you going to do with this knowledge, Mr. Shimmel? I'm going to go over here and stare at Gail's feet.
Well, so one of the things we've tried to do as we've brought these ad products to market is we've tried to do it in a very open, transparent way. We've had great advertiser partners who have been through some of the pilots that we've done with Targeting Now and Audience Now. And I think one of the things I'm just going to, if you're interested in trying to help us refine what that next step is, how do we build something that is transactionable against from something that adds on top of the layer of audience, just let us know. We would welcome your participation. So I think with that, we have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has questions.
This is really tactical, but how were you contacting people then? Was it a super controlled environment where you were having them watch a show and then asking them the question directly, or were you intercepting them on their phone? They were at home watching the show?
This was an online study. They were at home or wherever they were. And yeah, we controlled in terms of the content, obviously, and the ads that were placed with that content. And we obviously controlled the sample for how many were exposed to low, medium, and high evaluated shows.
And it was real time, or was it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.